Hello guys, buenos días, buenas tardes, or buenas noches. Welcome to another Spanish 101 video. Our topic for today is reflexive verbs, or in Spanish, verbos reflexivos. So, let me introduce the topic by showing you a situation in which we use a normal, regular verb. The verb is despertar. Okay? And let's look at this image. We have one sleeping person, right? And he seems to be having trouble waking up. His clock is ringing, but he doesn't seem to be able to wake up by himself, so a friend, a roommate, someone comes into the room, shakes him in order to wake him up, right? Now, despertar is actually an E to IE stem changing verb. Let's take that into account. And let's call the sleeping guy Lucas, and the guy that's going to wake him up, let's call him Marcos, okay? So I'm gonna build a sentence in Spanish to talk about this situation, to describe what's going on in the image. Marcos despierta a Lucas. Marcos wakes Lucas up, right? Marcos is the subject of the sentence, right? He's the one doing the action. Lucas is the one being woken up. And then despierta is the correct conjugation of the verb despertar for él, right? Obviously, that's the form of the verb we use for Marcos because it's him, right? Él. Marcos despierta a Lucas. Marcos wakes Lucas up, right? So that's just the standard ar verb used in a normal sentence, right? And it's despierta, not desperta, because it's an E to IE stem changing verb, okay? All of those things we already know. Now let's look at another image. Here we have a little girl, also with a clock by her side. But the little girl seems to be much more energetic than Lucas, right? She's waking up, but all by herself. She doesn't need any help whatsoever doing it. The way we would say this in Spanish would be la niña se despierta. La niña se despierta. And you can translate that into English by saying the girl wakes up. Or if you want to emphasize what is going on here, although it sounds a little awkward in English, you could say that the girl wakes herself up, right? As opposed to Lucas. Lucas needs Marcus's help, right? The girl does not. She actually wakes herself up, right? So, in a sense, the one that does the action and the one that receives the action are one and the same, right? Well, the verb here is despertarse. Not just despertar, but despertarse. And what that means is, yes, to wake up, or to be strict, it means to wake oneself up. Okay? In Spanish, there is a difference between despertar and despertarse, between waking up in the sense of waking someone up and despertarse to wake oneself up. Okay? The first one, despertar, is just a normal verb. The second one, despertarse, is what we know as a reflexive verb. Okay? So what are reflexive verbs? They are verbs in which the subject of the action, meaning the person or people who are doing the action, and the direct object of the action, meaning the person or people directly affected by the action, are one and the same. What do I mean by this? Well, let's look at how these things work in English, because in English you actually also have a way to talk about actions in which the person that does them and the person that is affected by them are one and the same. In English, you use the self pronouns to signal these verbs. Let's look at some examples. He embarrassed himself, right? I don't know, he walked into the classroom and he wasn't wearing any clothes, right? So he is clearly embarrassing someone, right? And the person being embarrassed is himself. He is the one embarrassing someone. He is also the one being embarrassed. He embarrasses himself. So the one doing the action and the one being directly affected by the action are one and the same, right? Perhaps a clearer example, she teaches herself Italian, right? She's not using any assistance whatsoever. She has no teacher, right? She just has a textbook, a dictionary, maybe some videos, maybe some songs, right? Some Duolingo on her phone, and she's using all these tools to teach herself Italian. She's both the teacher and the one being taught, right? She teaches herself, right? The subject of the action, the one doing the teaching, and the direct object of the action, the one being taught, are one and the same. A final example, I've been watching some uh, zombie movies lately, so this is what I came up with. They saved themselves from the zombies, right? No one else is saving them. There are no, there's no contingent of the army coming to save them, right? No policemen, no saviors at all. They are the ones saving themselves. They are the ones that save, and they are the ones being saved. The subject and the direct object of the action are the same. These are reflexive actions, right? So in English, you use these pronouns himself, herself, themselves, ourselves, right, to signal those reflexive actions. In Spanish, we use different tools, right? We use a special infinitive and also a new set of pronouns in order to construct what is known as reflexive verbs. But the conjugation itself is just like the ones we have learned, right? So it's actually not that complicated. So let's look in a little bit more detail at these rules. I said that we use a special infinitive. So the infinitive of all reflexive verbs ends in se, se, right? We had said that infinitives always end in either ar, er, or ir. Well, to the reflexive infinitive, we add also se, se. So think about the example from the previous slide, right? There was despertar, right? That was our normal verb, and then the reflexive version of it was despertarse. So despertar ends in AR, like a normal infinitive. In the reflexive version, we add SE at the end, right? Despertarse. So it ends in ARSE. What I'm saying is actually that all reflexive verb infinitives end in either ARSE, ERSE, or IRSE. You just add SE at the end and it becomes a reflexive infinitive. Okay? For example, a silly example, but it's the one I'm coming up with right now. We know that comer means to eat, right? If we want to turn it into a reflexive, right? If you're being accountable that it's him or herself, I know it's a silly example, it's an extreme example, but comerse means to eat oneself. Okay? If you add se, the verb becomes reflexive. Okay? That's the first rule. The special infinitive that ends in se. The second rule is that reflexive verbs are conjugated just like normal verbs, but you add reflexive pronouns before the verb. Okay? Before the verb. So let's look at an example. Okay? This is a woman waking up, right, by herself. No one is helping her. So we said that this action is despertarse, right? To wake oneself up. And we also said that despertar is an E to IE stem changing verb. Let's remember that, right? So let me show you the actual conjugation of this reflexive verb, despertarse. It goes like this. Yo me despierto, tú te despiertas, él se despierta, ella se despierta. Nosotros nos despertamos, ustedes se despiertan, ellos se despiertan. Right? Let's look at this in some detail, right? As usual, we have on the left the first column in which we find the personal pronouns, right? The possible subjects of an action. And then on the right, on the far right, we have the conjugation, and you will see that we are following the same procedure that we studied. We took the infinitive, we got rid of the end, right? In this case, we get rid of the S, the E, and also the A and the R. So with reflexives, you get rid of 4 letters instead of 2, right? And then we have the stem, which is despert, and since it's an E to IE stem changing verb, we make that change everywhere except for the nosotros, right? So what is happening in that far right column, we already know, right? It is the same way that you would conjugate any E to IE stem changing verb. Get rid of the ending, make the changes to the stem everywhere except for the nosotros form, and then add the endings. In this case, they are, of course, the ar endings because it's despertarse, it's an ar verb. Okay? So the only new thing, actually, that we're studying today are the pronouns that we find in the middle, right? Those are the ones that are known as the reflexive pronouns. Notice that we have different pronouns for almost every subject, right? So the right pronoun for yo is me, right? Yo me despierto. What does that mean? I wake up or I wake myself up. Tú te despiertas, right? You wake yourself up. Él se despierta, he wakes himself up. Ella se despierta, she wakes herself up. Nosotros nos despertamos, we wake ourselves up. Ustedes se despiertan, you guys wake yourselves up. Ellos se despiertan, they wake themselves up. Yes, I know, that sounds awkward in English. In English, you just say to wake up, right? I wake up. And that means you wake yourself up, right? But I am emphasizing the reflexive nature of the verb so that we know exactly what is happening here. So we are adding those pronouns before the verb, right? And that is the only actual difference between the conjugation of a reflexive verb and the conjugation of a normal verb, right? What I'm telling you is basically that the only thing you actually need to learn are these pronouns. And of course, the addition of the se to the infinitive, right? So the actual formula, if you want to look at it that way, for conjugating Reflexive verbs is that you start with the subject, right? The person or people that are doing the action. Then you add a reflexive pronoun, and at the end you add a normal conjugation. Okay? Let's look at another example. This guy, well, yeah, this is not the best drawing in the world, but what he's doing is getting out of bed, right? We have a reflexive verb in Spanish for getting out of bed. It means levantarse. Now, levantarse is not a stem changing verb, it's actually a regular AR verb, right? So, what does the conjugation look like? It goes like this: Yo me levanto, tú te levantas, ella se levanta, nosotros nos levantamos, ustedes se levantan, ellos se levantan. Right? Again, we have the subject in the first column, then we have the reflexive pronouns in the second, and then in the third column we have the normal conjugation, right? How did I get to this normal conjugation? In the same way that I have taught you for any other verb. We said it's an AR regular verb, so we get rid of that ending. We're left with the stem, which is levant, right? Since this is not a stem changing verb, we don't make any changes to the stem, and then we add the R endings. Right? So the only thing that we have to do in addition to that is inserting the reflexive pronouns right before the verb. And again, the structure I'm following is subject plus reflexive pronoun plus normal conjugation. Okay? Let's look at one final example. Afeitarse. So afeitar means to shave. So afeitarse means to shave oneself, right? And afeitarse is a regular adverb, just like levantarse, right? No changes to the stem. So what does the conjugation look like? Well, like this. Yo me afeito, tú te afeitas, él se afeita, ella se afeita, nosotros nos afeitamos, ustedes se afeitan, ellos se afeitan. Okay? Again, the conjugation is just your standard conjugation, right? Got rid of the ending of the infinitive and then added the R endings, and the only thing we are adding is those reflexive pronouns immediately before the verb. So first the subject, then the reflexive pronoun, and then the normal conjugation. Okay? So basically what I'm telling you is that the one thing you need to memorize in order to learn these well is this: los pronombres reflexivos, reflexive pronouns, those little words we are adding immediately before the verb to signal that this is a reflexive action, right? And they look like this, right? There's one for each possible subject. So the reflexive pronoun for yo is me, the reflexive pronoun for tú is te, the reflexive pronoun for both él and ella is se, the reflexive pronoun for nosotros is nos, the reflexive pronoun for ustedes is se, and the reflexive pronoun for ellos is se. Okay? Please memorize these pronouns and remember to insert them immediately before the conjugation of the verb if the verb you're given is reflexive. Eso es todo. That's all. Muchas gracias, muchachos. Hasta luego.